Good morning, beautiful people. I'm Chris from the Landlord Training Institute. We help income property owners manage their properties themselves without the stress of tenants and toilets or the ongoing expense of a property manager. This week's video is all about 2022. If you haven't already, subscribe and hit the bell below so you don't miss any weekly videos we put out. Okay, so let's get right into it. When we look ahead to 2022, if you happen to be north of the border in Canada, you know that the news media is constantly talking about interest rates. We hear a lot of news stories talking about how high they might go and what various stakeholders might need to do in order to manipulate things like inflation. We've heard a lot of that lately. Now, if we dig a little bit deeper and you look at debt loads by province in Canada, what you're going to find out is that everywhere down east, Ontario, and actually a good portion of the country, excluding Alberta and Saskatchewan, has a debt load that is greater than their GDP. So what would happen if the realized interest rates that those provinces see on the debt that they hold actually goes up? What you might find is that multiple provinces are in an extremely tight fiscal position. Now, there are provinces that are already in that position, especially down east, but that position gets much worse if interest rates go up. So my thoughts are that debt going forward is going to remain very cheap. Now, that being said, you always want to take leverage responsibly. So I don't believe in 95% loan to value. Even if I could get that, I wouldn't do it. I like having a little bit more security in what I buy. The next thing that I would like to talk about is we saw some announcements last week with the government instructing various departments to investigate what would be required for a down payment for an investment property. You can bet that is not going to be a decrease. So if there is a change, which we don't know yet, it is probably going to move to 25% down, maybe 30. So that's an indication from our federal government that they actually want to make it a little bit harder, maybe even a lot harder, to buy a revenue property. So what are the consequences of that? I can tell you that the federal government is not very good at predicting those consequences. I wouldn't necessarily even say they have thought about those consequences. But what you might see is something like this. We currently have a lot of duplexes here in Canada, especially Western Canada. What you might see as a result of changing down payments and increasing that down payment, because that will create a lower return on investment for investors, it'll push some of those folks to different asset classes. It might even push them outside of revenue property altogether. Now, what that would do is open up those properties for owner-occupied. But what happens when those properties get swallowed up by owner-occupied buyers? Well, they live in one unit, and now we have one unit as a rental available. What that does is take two rental properties and turn it into one. So it may influence the opportunity for more folks to be able to get into the market and buy their own home, but it also decreases the rental market. We will probably see some impacts of that if it actually happens. Next up, depending on where you are in the world, you may have seen a significant increase in the tenant rights movements. So you've seen things like the Keep Your Rent movement that actually swept the globe in 2020, and now here we are at the end of 2021. I do believe that as a whole, especially in North America, that is going to continue, and it will probably increase. Where I'm at in Western Canada, it wasn't probably as prevalent as it was in, say, Central Canada in Ontario and Quebec, but we definitely did see some consequences of that. I do believe that over the next decade, and certainly moving into 2022, that will continue. So what are the consequences to you as a landlord? Well, you'll probably see some legislation geared towards appeasing those folks. Now, what we've seen in areas like, say, Ontario is the provincial government is essentially actively flushing that one vote of the owner to gain the 12 votes of the residents. I see that type of thing increasing as we go forward through 2022 and 23. After that, another thing that I feel we should talk about are the floods recently in British Columbia. So we saw good portions of the number one highway, which is that main connector highway from coast to coast in Canada, completely wiped out. The road literally washed away. Now, if you remember the last time that we saw major flooding in Western Canada, that was the High River flood in Alberta a handful of years back. The result of that were most income property owners saw a 20% increase in their insurance rates the very next year. I think we can see the exact same thing coming forward in 2022 and 2023. I am absolutely pricing in a 20% increase in my insurance. So going forward, consider pricing in insurance increases, especially if you are in the multifamily world. If any of this is making sense to you, drop a comment down below. If you disagree, I'd love to chat about it. If you haven't already, subscribe and hit the bell below so you don't miss any weekly videos like this one. I will see you one more time in 2021, and then we'll see if I'm right about 2022.